Yeah,
Oh, so now you can no longer, it could be a citizen.
he could be a citizen member or a city member, lots of titles.
Maybe find somebody to vote with that.
Totally.
Possibility of having business farm. So. All right, well, I want to welcome everybody here. Welcome back, SWAC members, new and old. And thank you to the public for showing up. I'm going to do a quick roll call and then we'll start to share the screen. I'd like to do introductions of the SWAC members before we go too far, and then we'll start into where are we at, what's our next steps look like, what recently occurred, and where we're going. So my name's Tim Brownell. I'm the director of the Solid Waste Department. And I'm joined here with who's back over there?
Hi, I'm Susan Baker. I'm with the Solid Waste Department as well.
So I'm going to do a quick roll call, and then we'll go through the full introductions. Neil Bonsgard, from the Environmental Center.
That's me.
Welcome.
Thanks. Happy to be here.
You want to say what your role is briefly?
Yeah, so I am our transportation and climate policy manager at the Environmental Center. I've been around for 9, almost 10 years. Yeah, so representing the Environmental Center and our organization's connection with waste through the Rethink Waste project. Yeah.
Brent Bybee.
Yep.
And
Hey, how's it going, folks? Sorry I couldn't attend in person. I am the community development director here with the city of La Pine. Have some experience in the past with processing landfill sites as well with some other county jurisdictions. Past experience too, so hoping to help out.
great to have you, Brent. So Brent and Neil are both new members to the committee. Jackson Dumanche.
Hi, Jackson Dumanche, project coordinator with the City of Sisters Public Works Department. Been with the city since June 2020. Thank you.
Welcome. Jackson was the alternate before, and Paul Pacagna was the constant, and they've switched roles. So Paul will back up Jackson. Jackson can't make it. Luke Dines, are you online? Nope. Luke is a citizen at large. John Nielsen.
Yeah, hello all. John Nielsen, Redmond City Council, and a new member to the committee.
Welcome. Keith Caceres.
Yes, I'm Keith Caceres. I'm the Assistant General Manager at Sun River Owners Association. We spent about a year-long process working on our recycling center with Cascade Disposal and also with Deschutes County and making some changes there. So I'm pretty fan. I was on the committee prior to this during this whole process. So I'm happy to be back.
Yeah, good.
Thank you.
Cassie Mason.
Here, I'm Cassie Lacey. I am with the City of Bend in the City Manager's Office. I was on the SWAC before. I think I know everybody, except a few people online. I've been with the city for 7 years, and I primarily lead our environmental and sustainability programs.
Good to see you. Chris Ogren, who was a citizen at large committee member before, now works with the City of Bend. So he is the alternate to Cassie. Erica.
I'm Eric Heisman with For Public Services, which is one of the franchise haulers for this area. I am the general manager for public services at the Central Oregon business unit. I've been with Republic Services for 5 years.
Tim Shimke, is Tim online? So Tim is replacement for who's he replacing? Jared Black. Jared Black was a citizen at large, technical. He was filling a role of the technical engineering and technical. Tim Shimke has been appointed to replace that position. Tim was the former director of the solid waste department, led the landfill siting process back in '96 when they were contemplating looking at other facilities in the county. So the board appointed him at their last meeting on Wednesday to that position. Erwin Sweatman.
President, market manager for Cascade Disposal.
Also one of the two franchise holders. And Michael Grove, his alternate, is in no appointment this year.
Yeah. Michael Grove, district manager, Cascade Disposal.
And Robin Vora.
Yeah, Robin Vora, I was on the committee last time, and I guess I'm a large member. So I'm looking forward to continuing, I think. It's not always fun, given, nobody likes a landfill in their backyard. But I think it's an important decision, and I want to continue to be part of that.
Thanks for coming back. You guys want to introduce yourselves?
Yeah, Dwight Miller, project principal, working with Parametrics, working with Ryan on this project.
I'm Ryan Rudnick, project manager of this phase, worked on the prior phases with Dwight and Tim and the group here.
So you'll see all of this again.
Yeah. It's great to be back with you all, even though we didn't expect it.
And Stephanie?
Okay, Stephanie Marshall, Senior Assistant Legal Counsel, been on this since I joined the county in 2022.
Thank you. And then online, Sue Manette, you want to introduce yourself, Sue?
Yes, Sue Monette, Management Analyst for the Department of Solid Waste. Been on multiple SWACs as we've progressed through the years.
And Chad Santola.
Hey, good afternoon, all. Chad Santola, former director of solid waste for Deschutes County, and I've been working as a consultant with Tim for the past 2 years since retirement. It's nice to see some familiar faces again, and also some new faces to the committee. Hi, Sue, in the back there. So anyway, it's a little bit surprising to be back with this again, but it's good to see everybody.
Yeah, good to see you, Chad.
Thanks.
All right, so Sue, will you let us share the screen? I'll start the presentation. So welcome to the reconvened SWAC. Today's agenda, so we just did introductions. We'd like to open it up for anybody in the public if you have any comments. Wanted to make sure you had the time in the beginning to make sure that we weren't. Didn't fill it up, so go ahead.
Okay.
You want to say your name?
Right, yeah. I'm wondering whether I should do anything humorous or not, but it's not. This isn't my first time. I have followed this process for a long time. My name is Steve Payer. I live out at Pine Mountain on the Rock East property. I'm a good friend of Ross. I've represented them in some of their real estate dealings. Have no skin in the game here, other than if they decide to buy that, I'm gonna have to move, so maybe I would shoot myself in the foot, but anyhow, property out there. I would strongly urge this committee to revisit that. They were second runner-up to Moon Pit. And normally when the front runner gets disqualified from using the crop too many times, the second horse wins the Derby. And so I think enough things have changed significantly that if the committee would short fuse their due diligence and relook at Roth East, that's what I'm recommending. Since the Moon Pit, the wheels came off, Roths have really reduced their asking price. They were 7.5 million and they've dropped a lot of bucks off of that. The fact that we found water rights that we think can use out there, that was one of the things that Parametric said, we gotta have this water for 50,000 gallons of water a day. And we've worked with a water rights examiner that thinks there's a path forward because of all the patents, the legal patents that are out there. There's probably 15 legal parcels and allegedly you can drill a well on each of those. Of course, you gotta find water, but we have 3 good wells. Well, 2 really good wells. In fact, I ran one the other day to fill a pond. The neighbor said that there's sage grouse there at the pond and they want to drink. So went down and turned the switch and now we've got a full pond for the birds. The strong suit is the ability to mine and create, they call them cells, I guess, big holes in the ground. You can do that with a spoon. It's an unconsolidated alluvial strata that I think they went down 400 feet, if I remember right. And it's just all cobbles and pea gravel, sand and dirt, lots of dirt to cover up all the stinky stuff. And finally, I guess people would argue, even though we have this the new state grouse map that the county commissioners approved a couple of months ago, we're not in the core area, we're in the low density, but you're still gonna have ravens. And they play hob with chicks, eggs, and mature grouse, as do badgers, possums, hawks, owls, raccoons, and all the other things that like to eat sage grouse, because bless their hearts, sage grouse have not been blessed with a high IQ. They like to hide under sagebrush, and we have that habitat. But the thing about ravens is they will fly 35 miles from their nighttime roosting area to where they're going to feed. So wherever you come up with a new idea for a new place to have the dump, it's going to be within a 35-mile radius. So the raven issue isn't going to go away, folks. So I think we could deal with it out there at Pine Mountain. And several of you are fairly new, so anytime somebody wants to go visit and take a look, I'm happy to give you the grand tour. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Anyone else? No?
Yeah, I have a comment. My name is Leroy Cabana. I'm a resident here. I've been following the SWAC since it started. And it's something that I feel is really in Deschutes County's best interest. If it can be done practically, you know, when you have a 100-year landfill is a challenge for anybody in any spot when you consider all the environmental and the wildlife and transportation and costs and all that other stuff. But I mean, I thought this baby was put to bed, and I'm sitting here just frustrated and a little surprised that we didn't have like a sales agreement, some kind of a purchase agreement before we got down and whittled down to, you know, the final. I mean, seriously, if it were me, and I've done a lot of developing, I've done a lot of letters of understanding, and you don't have any negotiating power left when you will yourself down, and then you go to the guy and you say, well, let's make a deal. And I'm just surprised, so I'm gonna attend these and try to figure out how we got there. And I'm just trying to figure out who the heck allowed the commissioners to vote on reducing this down to the final one without a solid purchasing agreement. It's just, I'm just beyond belief and shocked, but I want to attend this. And actually, I would like a seat on this board whenever it opens up. So. Great,
Thank you. Anyone else in the room? Sue, is there anybody online with a raised hand wants to make a comment?
Not at this time.
With that, no entry. Do you have a public comment? We're just about to close public comment.
No, not yet. Thank you.
All right, we'll close public comment. And let me, so we will go through, how did we get here? A bit about the landfill siting process itself, an update about the Moon Pit property negotiations and our meeting with the Board of County Commissioners, and the direction that they gave for this group. But we wanted to make sure, since we have a number of new folks on the committee or potentially starting to follow this process, we'll give you a little bit of an overview of how we got there. How we got to this current current place. So these just to let folks know how we populated the this committee. So we do have every city has an incorporated city in the county has a representative in the SWAC committee. Each of the haulers, one is as a representative of the hauling community, one actually that is operating the recycling programs here in the county. So Cascade Disposal is the hauling representative, and Republic Services is the recycling representative. This is under the construct of the committee is under county code. We have two citizen at large folks who represent. One represents the technical, one represents accounting and finance, and then two general at large members. And those who were the at large members, they submitted a application. Robin, I think you were one of those, and selected and appointed by the board. So that was, this process started in February of 2022 with applications and appointment of the committee, and I think our first meeting was April 2022. Ultimately, what this group does is we have been evaluating candidate sites, and then the committee makes a recommendation to the board. So the committee doesn't make the decision as to what will be the final landfill site, but we do the work of evaluating and assessing and recommending to the Board of County Commissioners what we feel is the best location, most viable site, and then the Board of County Commissioners takes action. So we had, this committee had convened for about 2 years, and I believe it was in April of 2024 that it made the recommendation, the Moon Pit site. And we'll get into what happened there in a moment. So with that, you want to talk a little bit about the process itself?
Yeah. So welcome back, everyone. A little refresher for many of you and kind of some new information for others about what we went through, starting in late winter of 22 through last spring, and then now we're kind of back to this point. I just want to kind of say we took a step back, not more than a step back, really. I mean, kind of in the process. It's not like we're starting from ground zero or anything, but so I kind of wanted to go through this process we went through, broad site screening to focus screening, and then on to the selected sites. So we're here, property negotiations halted, and so supplemental screening and evaluation of alternative sites. So that's where we're at today. So we're calling it supplementary because we've already done the process. We're supplementing that process with additional sites. Or additional site and looking at them through a little bit different lens. And Ryan will get into that after I present on this. So as you might recall, that put somewhere else. Fade away. So that. Well, so you had your handouts too. So we had the initial areas identified by the county. So these are essentially looking at all the parcels in the county that were of a size that could be looked at for siting and storage. So we were looking roughly, around 500 acres, 300 I think 3,000 is kind of what they amounted to. And generally looking at parcel assemblages that could meet that. So you take that and then you look at the exclusionary area mapping. And so these are areas that were excluded because of the quote unquote fatal flaw items within the criteria that we were looking at. So you'll see some particularly large areas here. This is probably the most significant one to how this all played out, and that is the core sage-grouse areas down here, particularly in this part of the county. These areas here were for the airport setbacks of 10,000 feet off the airports. And then this is the Badlands, Wilderness. These are just the municipal boundaries. And so we weren't going to put it in the cities. So you combine those together, and this kind of gives you the broad screening areas that we started to look at, where kind of areas of interest. And so these green areas are federal. The others are just other, so they're private, they are public other than federal, so state, county, or whatever. We kind of early on decided that because of the federal process for acquisition, that those are generally not seen as very positive to be looking at those. And so generally we're screened out, although some of those did come back later in the process just to see if any of those made sense. So within this broad site screening, so again, we're looking at these areas. Parcel assemblages, 5 parcels or fewer. It is probably more important, it's like 5 owners or fewer, because sometimes you can have lots of parcels that are owned by one person or owned by one entity. And so that's not necessarily the case here, but I know in other sites or areas that we've looked at, that's kind of been the case. So then it developed some footprints based on kind of what conceptual site would look like, so buffers, topography, and then dropping those outside the exclusionary areas. Looking at the parcel level information using GIS resources. I've been doing this for about 40 years. Way back then, we didn't have GIS. It's so nice having GIS and being able to go through this so much more quickly and really much more robustly than we were able to in the past. So then we scored the sites according to the broad site screening. And so we had 30-something criteria that we were scoring against. And then we eliminated sites that had fatal or practical flaws. Probably the most significant practical flaw was an unwilling seller. And so the county didn't necessarily want to go down that condemnation route. And although it kept Stephanie very busy, but decided not to go down that way. So that brought us to quite a few sites around the county, looking at different areas, pretty much throughout the county, outside of the exclusionary areas. just some general things that kind of knock some sites out fairly quickly. Difficult to get to a lot of these sites over here because it all required urban routes to get to, and so it's difficult to get to a lot of those. Fairly shallow groundwater down in kind of down south around the Pine. And then these being wide a ways out, kind of another issue, just kind of things that we were looking at the time. So we went through a pretty robust scoring on all the sites. And as you can see over here, we kind of had a lot of fatal flaws that dropped sites out. And then kind of the greener it is, the darker green, that just meant that it had a higher score. And so those were the ones that kind of were lifted to the top and we took into focus screening. So dropping out quite a few sites here. So like I noted, practical flaws, here, for instance, not workable because of, very fairly small area. Steep slopes is also an item that came up quite a bit. And then this was, impractical snow, heavy issues, as far as roadway and so forth. The practical flaws of being able to sell or not, or buy it or not. So all of those coming out, we looked at, we kind of advanced from the broadside screening into the focus screening and conducted outreach to the site property owners to verify the acquisition potential, to ensure that those were, we could acquire those, kind of could acquire those. Scored sites according to the focused site screening then. So we took these sites, to go through the focus screening, which really was a higher level of detail in evaluating the sites. More than just, the GIS databases, looking at more specifics on those sites. And then also did a lot of, kind of looking at residential dwellings. This wasn't specifically one of the criteria, but we wanted to actually identify it out there. How many residents were within a mile, how many residents were within 2 miles. So those were some of the additional decision-making points for it. And then used a kind of a cost comparative process as well for these to determine, generally speaking, which ones were relatively more expensive or less expensive to develop than others. So these were the sites that were identified for the focus screening, all the way from Negus up here down to a couple here just to the east of Bend, and then down through Milliken and on this side of Horse Ridge, and then way out here at Rutherford.
Seems like you left off the BLM sites. Or we didn't quite get to focus.
They didn't quite make it at this point yet, actually, because they came back in when we were looking at additional sites, because a lot of sites were falling off. And so say, okay, should we take another look at some of the federal sites? So that's a good point, Robin, because we were looking at one of those sites was up here, and then another site was kind of down right in this area here.
Right at that county border up there also?
Yes.
Somewhere in there.
Right in this area. Yeah. And so those, we did look at those, and that was kind of past, but almost kind of in the focus screening period that we looked at those sites. And what actually happened with those sites, and I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but I did want to note, it was looking at the farther radius away from the airports that we took up because of the FAA funding mechanism that says, 5 and 6 mile radius away from airports to receive federal funding and other mechanisms there. And then also because those sites were all in heavy rock. I mean, and it had not undeveloped sites in rock. And so it's not like there is a quarry there already, that it already kind of made somewhat of a excavation. So we went through the process. So as we did the criteria, so specific areas were site characteristics and engineering. So that's the yellow here. So if you're hired there, that just meant it was a little bit better site from an engineering perspective. Natural environment is next up. Wider bands there means that it was a better site, you know, from an environmental standpoint. And then land use finally in a bigger band area, it just means that it was a better site from land use standpoint. So yeah, so this one here identifies the sites that we dropped out because of the airport radius. So this included the Negus transfer station site, quite close to the Redmond Airport. And then these two sites down here to the west of town, east of town, that were close to, too close to the Bend Airport.
It was Rickard and Bear Creek.
Yeah.
Right, those ones packed around.
Yep, yep.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Remember that.
Yeah, and then, you know, some sites came out, just that, you know, at the acquisition issues. In fact, this one ended up dropping, so this is the Golden Basin at that time, which at the time, I think the owner did not want to sell, and so we dropped it off the list at that time. So that brought us down to two finalist sites, and those were the Moon Pit site, and this is the concept design we had for that site. This is Badlands here. It's just off of 20 on a BLM easement access road, and then the Roth East site out here, Milton's in this area, just to the east of that, a little farther out, 20. Probably the most significant issues between the two sites that differed between these two sites, haul route for one thing, you know, just the distance to Roth East would be greater and having to go to Horse Ridge to get out there. And then also the natural environment issues were greater at Roth East. But Roth East, as Steve noted, had really good soils out there for operation of, you know, development and operation of landfill. So, you know, there are trade-offs there. And so those were the things that we were looking at. And then that brought to the SWAC here, back in April of last year, unanimously recommended going forward with Moon Pit. The commissioners took that into advisement, had meetings and a vote on it on July 10th of last year to go forward with the Moon Pit site. One thing I do want to note is that both of these sites, the county solicited a letter of interest and a what was it called, Tim? I'm trying to remember the term you had for that, those letters.
Well, there were solicitation letters is what we.
Okay,
sent to them.
yeah.
And they responded to.
And they responded to those with price for the properties and so on. And so that's kind of what was the basis for moving forward with these two private sites, willing sellers with a price at that point. And I'll let you do it up there.
Yeah, you can reel me in if I get out.
Had a front row seat.
Get ready.
So Moon Pit, after so the board approved the SWAC recommendation. I just want to review the SWAC recommendation, which was to pursue a purchase sale agreement with Moon Pit for the development of a new 100-year landfill. To expedite our development of recovery of the waste stream, so expand diversion here in the county, as well as for any site selected to not just meet the statutory requirement for mitigation, environmental mitigation, but to do what was referred to as enhanced mitigation for any site and environmental impacts in and around that site. So that was approved by the board. So we started meeting with the owners of Moon Pit shortly after. I think we started in August. And it was after about seven or 8 months of meeting and negotiating that the county determined that we were at impasse and that we were not going to be able to move forward with that site. We took that staff and board of county commissioners made that assessment and determination. And then we went back to the board for approval of what to do next. With the Moon Pit site, we were having issues with the timeline of closing. In addition to working on a purchase sale agreement, we were also doing review of some of the permitting components, in particular, the right-of-way easement, that the road that goes from Highway 20 to the pit itself, Moon Pit site, that's across BLM property. It became apparent that the county was going to have to go through a full EIS or NEPA process, environmental impact statement, which would take it would take probably 3 years to go through that process. So we were negotiating about what the timeline on closing would be. We were also negotiating on an appraisal and what the role, first of all, getting an appraisal done and what the role of that appraisal would be within the price of the facility. And part of this was around the fact that the county was going to have to, under the desired agreement, purchase as soon as possible that Hooker Creek wanted. We would have to purchase it without knowing whether we would have the ability to permit it or not. So we wanted to make sure that our timeline to close was with enough vision to be able to know what we'll be getting into, as well as what was the value of the property relative to the concept of if we weren't able to permit it and the county had to turn around and sell it. So what was the role of an appraisal within determining price was a place where we got stuck. And then uncertainty about the water rights and the cost of the water rights. So those were the three predominant issues. Have I said it safely?
Yeah, I think you have, and I think you hit all the highlights, Tim. The one thing that we were kind of hoping for was a structured agreement whereby certain amounts of earnest money would be released when certain milestones were met. And that wasn't an option. But again, trying to be mindful of the confidentiality of the negotiations. I think Tim's covered, the primary issues on which we weren't able to reach even conceptual agreements.
So the BLM, oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead. I have a question.
So the BLM, you contacted them directly and they said it would take 3 years to use the same road to.
Yeah, we had a conference with BLM either late December or early January. And one of the things we were suggesting is maybe this doesn't need a full EIS because we're driving trucks just like people are, just like the mining operation is driving trucks. And they were pretty insistent that it was going to be a change of use and that a change of use triggers an EIS requirement. So, a little bit, disappointing, but now we know that, that will probably be the same answer we get if we're talking about federal lands with respect to any other site.
They said 3 years.
Well, that's just an estimate, I can tell you that both from a federal and then they have a similar statute in Washington State called SEPA. There's usually multiple appeals and there's, remand and fix this and do that, and, you know, I mean, it's just, you know, because it really is a thorough analysis of everything, you know, from aesthetics to water to air to wildlife. You know, it's really full blown, and it has to meet certain standards in order to, you know, be approvable and approved. And then you still have people that end up objecting sometimes, and, you know, not that that's right or wrong, but that just adds to the process.
Yeah, and it took until then to get, until December or so for the deal and to get a big definitive out what it was. We were hoping it might be as simple as a
Yeah.
TX.
Right.
Right, because they were gonna, or they did explore the possibility of a categorical exclusion, which is the lowest level of review, where they basically respond to 12 questions and then they check, you know, if that is, and then assess whether that would be legally defensible for them to, you know, agree with that. And then that would be it as far as the level of review, but they determined that would not be sufficient
But
for
it's
the
a new-
scale of the project and the impact of the connected action, which is the development of the landfill, for which they kind of hold the keys.
Yeah, but it's an in-between level, the environmental assessment, that they can also do.
Yeah, and I think what they were feeling is it was on the borderline of the two, and if an environmental assessment got appealed, then it would go to an EIS. So it collectively, it was really, it was determined that that was the timeline we should really be committed to. Part of this all has to do with the fact that the pit was started prior to the establishment of the Badlands Wilderness. And under the Badlands, you know, under the National Monument statutes, I think it's, they would have to do a full EIS if they had tried to cite the landfill
Today,
after. So they were kind of caught because of the timing of when it was initially, the right of way was initially granted. And then the subsequent kind of development had them kind of really scratching their heads as to how are they going to have to approach this.
One other question, reference to water rights, because I know water rights, there's a lot of value in those in reference to permitting for those. Initially, I imagine the property owner gave us a price of what the water rights would be to switch over to county, right? During that negotiation, did that price ever change?
No, so they initially, they never gave us they gave us lease rights, not
Not actually
water
full, right? Okay, got
The
it.
board gave direction that they wanted to secure water rights.
That's what I thought, yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
So-
But then obviously the property owner did not want to give those up.
They were willing to
Oh.
discuss it. It was then what would the price be before the
Right.
water rate
Right.
necessary. So that was.
Sure.
that was the other, one of the other pieces. So, I'll continue into kind of what we did next when we went to the board. I might answer some other questions, but feel free to come back and ask any other questions they have. So we were updating the board regularly on the negotiations. And then at the board meeting in March, we did the kind of public overview of what occurred. And then we presented some options to the board. Some of the information we provided to them was a study that had been done by a consulting firm at J.R. Miller Associates around. First, every few years, we do this as part of our solid waste management plan. It is to do assessment of, are there alternative disposal besides landfilling? And so we take a look to see, are there alternatives that would be viable and economical here in the county? Based on that review, nothing was technically or economically viable at this time. And a lot of that is things like gasification or chemical recycling or incineration, different forms of transferring waste into energy. Those are kind of the primary approaches. None of those, we don't have enough waste here to make any of those kind of economically viable at this point. And many of them are technically having difficulties where they are trying it, particularly on the chemical recycling or gasification of waste. Works very well for homogeneous streams of plastics.
Yep.
Also, was provided to them was the cost of the potential out of county transfer of waste to landfills up on the gorge. There are three large regional landfills up there. Under the solid waste management plan, it was determined to site one in the county, if at all feasible, and the board reaffirmed that at the meeting as well. That they want us to have to manage our waste and manage it responsibly. So it was asked to them, did they want us to reconvene the SWAC, or did they want to move on to the Roth East site? They recommended reconvening the SWAC. And at least to rescreen or reevaluate any sites that may have been removed and conditions had changed. So that's what we'll step into now is some of those alternate sites that might be available. It is the option of this committee that at any time, we have done a full technical review of the Roth East site. So if you felt that that was appropriate to recommend to the board, you may do so. The one thing that did come out of that meeting was Commissioner Chang had recommended, and so there wasn't a motion that they made, but there were recommendations that they proffered. And one of them was to make, before it comes back to the board, to your point, Leroy, is that we have a letter of intent, not a full purchase agreement, I don't believe, Stephanie, but an MOU and a letter of intent outlining terms and conditions of the sale. And if we could bring back two, they would, that would also be helpful to keep somebody's feet to the fire. So that was a recommendation, not something that they are giving direction to this group. Okay. So again, here's where we're at. Depending, we'll kind of go through timeline. We're figuring that we aren't going to be making any recommendation on any site today. But that over the next couple of meetings, and at any meeting, you could recommend a site, or you could have us continue to do some evaluation of potential alternative sites, so you have a full option to look at.
Are you gonna continue to consider Moon Pit in any way, or could you come back to that discussion?
So Moon Pit is, it's been fully technically reviewed, evaluated, so if they were to come back to the county, it could be considered, but we would have to make sure that we negotiated a full deal.
So we can keep that open during this process in case the process might convince them if they see an alternative coming.
Yeah.
To come back to the table.
Correct.
Still would have to go
How
to
would it
the
be different now than when it wasn't accepted?
Not expecting much different, but it doesn't mean that it might get more, they might get more flexible with timing or terms.
Yeah, I heard indirectly from a person involved with that on their side, suggesting that if the owner and the county commissioners just sat down in a room, they'd work it out.
Yeah, no, as if that's good process.
Handshake, short handshake.
Yeah, well, drum roll, alternate here.
On another note.
But before that was just a teaser. Let's go through some of the things that have changed since we looked at this before. You may wonder, why are we getting back to this? We already went through this process. How are we gonna end up with any sort of this different result? Well, one thing is a slower than expected waste growth over the last couple of years, in the county has extended not landfill's projected, solid waste disposal capacity now to approximately 2031. So in a sense, we found another 2 years of capacity in not landfill, due to the changing trends.
It's odd to see that. It's actually true because just of all the new buildings going on, especially east of here, and hundreds of homes. Eventually, that what expected may actually get there. But that's great, about some more years, that's good, but still, it seems odd. with all
But it is a
the-
moving target. It's
Yeah.
Well, both ways.
Yeah.
Right.
So it could move up or forward, but there's some more time to take a good look at this and ensure that the best site is selected. Yet, the urgency still does remain for selecting an alternate site. A couple other factors relevant to siting have also been updated, and some sites that were previously screened out have become more feasible due to these changes. For example, the sage-grouse habitat maps adopted in 2025, these changed the mitigation requirements for some sites, which were previously in, say, general sage-grouse habitat, and that third zone has now been eliminated. There's now core and low density. And so there's no longer a sage-grouse habitat mapped on one or two sites in particular. New eagle nest, golden eagle nest location data from the Forest Service provides more precise habitat impact assessments than what we had available at the section during broadside screening, which was mapped just the section level. So more precise data helps us assess the habitat impacts to eagle nests or at least one site. Also, the increased willingness from some property owners to sell land. As you saw before, many were eliminated because the property owner wasn't willing to sell. That has changed. And then solid waste staff are also open to considering, given, how things have narrowed down, a smaller site that's less than 250 acres, if it can facilitate at least 80 years of disposal capacity.
Versus 100, correct?
Yeah, versus 100. Let's still consider it and see what we can do with what we have. While 100 was the goal to help narrow down, some of those that are slightly under that are still worth considering and developing and have the economy of scale and kind of long-term capacity for siting in the county. So,
So that seems like that 250 acre business. Versus what we said before, 400.
No, we were looking for, we wanted to have parcels that were 500 acres,
500.
of which 250 acres were fillable.
And the rest was.
So we
Yeah.
needed 250 acres, generally speaking, to have about 100 years.
Okay, so now you still need the 250 acres, but the site doesn't have to be 500.
No, we could, the site could be a little smaller. The 500 was to make sure that we had adequate buffer. Yeah, really, is what we're looking for.
So does
You
that
know,
open,
we could go down to 213 acres or something like that.
so does that put us way back in the beginning with a whole bunch of potential
Not
sites to look at?
Yeah.
No, no.
There are a lot of other items that were more
Okay.
differentiating sites.
and it depends on the shape, the configuration, the topography, a lot of different variables. Toward a smaller site could be 200 acres and have 100 years of capacity, depending on the topography and the hillside relief or whatnot. So these are the alternate sites that we're now presenting to the SWAC to consider. Some of these you may have seen before, some of these are variations of sites that we had looked at before. As you can see in red, Moon Pit, the red dot indicating that has been it is at an impasse in terms of negotiations. Roth East was evaluated at the same level as Moon Pit, shown in green, and so that is the most ready, so to speak, to move forward as a recommended site. The four in orange there are kind of the new alternate sites that you can see as alternates to Moon Pit and as alternates to Roth East as candidate sites. And so Dodds, there's a site along Dodds Road owned by CYD. We'll get into further details later, but this was evaluated to, I think, the broad site screening level. And then the main reason there was elimination due to size and other residences and ranches. nearby.
That's not the same as the Dodge site that we did consider.
We did before, it's the same.
Oh,
No,
that's
but
the
it
one
was,
that
it
got all
was
the
Bear,
people.
the one, that was Bear.
Oh, Bear Creek, that was owned by
Yeah.
CYD.
Yeah,
Off there, yeah, it's a different
It's a
site,
different site further up.
same owner.
I have a quick question.
Sure.
Are I'm probably going to answer my own question because I know ODFW, but are the sage grouse mitigation measures more stringent or less stringent? Yeah.
As far as rule changes, we haven't gone into that in great detail, but particularly just the map changes in terms of where those zones are now. Generally, the core zone moved further northwest, the core area moved out from where it was before, and low density areas pulled back.
Okay.
Generally.
And those are some of the main concerns out at the Ross sites, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's the core, the sage grouse core moved about 3 miles farther, I believe. Is that it? 3 miles or?
Closer.
Right.
Yeah. So it's outside of the property, the Rockies property, by maybe a couple hundred feet, but further from,
Yeah.
let's see, half a mile from the
Yeah,
coastal
when we were
area.
first looking at it, it was a couple miles, the core was a couple miles off from the Rockies. Now it's adjacent, but not in.
Mhm. So it's still in low, but it's in closer proximity to core now.
Okay, thank you.
Did the airport rules change? At the county commission meeting, you made some comment that the airport rules might have been tweaked a little bit.
They have, I believe that they had posted what their exclusionary process to the FAA advisories were. I don't know if you've looked at them or can speak to that at all.
Yeah, I've looked into it a little more. It's nothing too impactful to the citing process or consequential. They updated one of the circulars to provide more recent data on bird strikes and whatnot, more detail as to when those are more likely to happen, the elevations at which more bird strikes occur, which is refining context, I guess, to the consideration of bird strike risk. But they still recommend a 5 mile exclude radius where there isn't a landfill sited. And there's a 6 mile restriction that was there before and was still in this updated circular. But that only applies to certain airports that meet certain criteria in terms of the number of airplanes.
Does the circle looks bigger around Redmond Airport than around Bend, or is that just my imagination?
Oh, it's a larger campus, larger.
Oh, okay, because of that. Okay.
And that was the thing that we found out during the process is, we mapped the area that they owned. And then they apparently have another boundary far beyond that they consider to be a part of their ultimate master plan developed extent.
Okay. Oh, so you use that.
So they said, this is the boundary you should be
Yeah, it's
using.
kind of like the early growth boundary of the airports.
Yeah.
So what it comes down to is that the original 5 and 10,000 foot buffers off the ends of the runways. So it's very specific to the ends of the runways. The 5 and 6 mile radiuses are off the airport boundaries or the expanded growth boundary. And so that's why they are so much wider.
Those are recommendations, but if we don't follow them, then the airport doesn't get federal money or something.
Neither of those would be at risk of losing federal funding due to something, to a landfill being within 6 miles. They don't meet that criteria.
Right.
But
I mean, not the sites, but I mean, if we did go back to a site within there, those are still just recommendations. Right?
Sure.
They're not, it's not law.
You're right.
It's just the county commissioners would have to fight the FAA a little bit, or the airports.
I mean, really, all that's required within 5 miles is that FAA has a chance to review.
Yeah. So I guess one consideration is that there's a really excellent site in there. Do we want to push that?
Do you know of any really excellent
Well,
sites?
I still like that Highway 97 site, but is it, because that map would rule it out, I assume.
Yeah, it's ruled out by the advisory. It's also, that site has some other challenges. One is
A lot of rock.
It's all rock.
But it has some great advantages in terms of logistics and taxpayer expense and environmental issues.
Yeah, well, I would say making dirt out of rock is expensive, so. Yeah, I think if you were really, and there are questions, and we were having some of these questions around Moon Pit too, is what's the permeability of, if we're making crushing rock to be our daily cover? We have pretty strong discharge limits around, particularly around methane gas. And if we're actually covering with crushed rock as opposed to dirt, are we going to have problems with methane discharges? So if the site is entirely rock, that becomes a real concern to us, particularly as right now the legislative session is pushing forward even more stringent requirements on methane testing and more exacting testing. So it just raises the risk on some of those future.
So you're eliminating all the BLM sites then?
At this point, but doesn't mean we can't reconsider them. It's the preference of the committee.
And was that the permeability of the crushed rock, or was that something else? The
Yeah,
process?
permeability.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, permeability to air and methane.
Okay.
Groundwater in this case.
There's also a lengthy process for BLM land acquisition.
Yeah.
There'd be a railway crossing, coordinating with BNSF. Substantial opposition from property owners nearby for that site. And the BOCC did officially move to consider that 5-mile radius to be an exclusionary zone. And so that decision would need to be reversed to view that differently. And it was kind of a conservative approach to not go against the recommendations and the theory that could be exposing the county to risk. If there was a recommendation that said you shouldn't, and then a bird strike happens, there could be some finger pointing, so to speak. So that's why that conservative buffer is provided around the airports.
Yeah, I think I told you, I flew into Salt Lake Airport and that landfill is only about 3 miles away. That's a lot bigger airport.
Yeah, yeah.
A lot more birds around there too.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, but you're right, it's not law. It's a recommendation, and there's a wildlife attraction just north of the Bend Airport, which is the wastewater ponds. And there's lots of birds out there, and plaques about all the birds and different species. So, that is something that can be looked at. It would require, a demonstration or an assessment of the bird strike risk at a certain distance, and if it was 4 miles away or 4.5, that assessment could be presented to FAA and the airports, if that was of interest. But I think the takeaway is the cons greatly outweigh the pros for the Highway 97 BLM site at this time, unless, SWAC would like us to look further. All right, are we ready to dive into these a little bit more?
Yeah.
All right, so I think we ended up here at the dogs, right?
I think that's slides.
The Horse Ridge site, we had looked at that through, I think it was broadside screening. Golden Basin was looked at through focus screening, but was eliminated due to the owner's unwillingness to sell. That site was recently listed along with multiple other properties held by that ranch, Crowbird Ranch, Golden Basin Ranch. So there's an alternate site there beside that one that we'll look at here. And then Roth Northeast is a different area on the Roth East property that provides some unique advantage. So let's move forward. So Roth East, y'all are pretty familiar with this site by now. It's finalist site, evaluated same level as Moon Pit. Further studies not required for site selection. It's near the southeast extent of the Milliken Valley and Basin. Within the low density sage grouse habitat area. Core sage grouse zone is about 1/2 mile southeast of the disposal area, which is shown there in black. As we've heard from many members of the public, there's a variety of recreational uses in the broad vicinity. Not right next to the site, but generally within a couple miles, there's OHV, paragliding, hiking, etc. Shooting.
Observatory.
The observatory, yes. Nearest residence is approximately 0.7 miles distant, and those are to the east. Setback 1 mile from the Pine Mountain Road and Highway 20, and it's screened relatively well by view from topography. From this view, it's maybe hard to imagine that it would be hidden, but it's pretty interesting when you're up there how some of the curvature of the slopes screens it pretty well from the Pine Mountain Road, which is that main road, that big straightaway as you head to Pine Mountain, and from Highway 20. And then 23 to 27 miles from West Centroid. And as Steve mentioned, all raw properties have been recently offered for sale, which could include roughly 3,000 acres and 19 to 20 or so individual parcels. And it's expected to be a very cost-effective site to excavate and operate on site due to the 300-foot depth of alluvial sediment, sand, gravel, cobbles. No drilling and blasting like would be needed at Moon Pit. Also, the extra haul distance does create an additional operational cost, hauling year after year. We approximated that at about 800,000 per year, roughly, due to that extra haul.
So as Steve mentioned earlier, that the owners of the property have reduced the price. So, or looking to reduce the price of that offering. So yeah, if it's 800,000 a year to transport, depending on what the reduction in price is, it could offset some of that for the first few years.
Yeah.
Short-term gain, not a long-term gain.
That's a good point.
So
Yeah.
will the wildlife mitigation costs go higher now that the sage-grouse core habitat is closed?
That's an interesting question. I mean, it sits in low, and so it's in that kind of mitigation framework. But one of the things that our biologists looked at with this site at the final site evaluation level is the radius and what is within the radius, the habitat within the radius, and now that there's more core area within that, it could be higher.
It could be a higher cost.
That's something we can make a note to look at if we proceed to review sites.
And would the county buy all 3,000 acres? Do you have enough money for that?
I think we would look at it just as we look at what are the mitigation, both requirements and opportunities if we were to purchase all of that property. Would that be helpful in terms of doing enhanced
So
mitigation?
you would restore the rest of it
Yeah,
to something?
You get it all, you might get it less.
what's that?
You take it all, you might get it less.
Although the ravens and eagles and all will still show up.
And
Because of mitigation,
yeah, within that offer is also the offer for grazing rights too, but as we're learning more about it. With grazing rights, it's a use it or lose it type of thing, so I don't think the grazing rights would be able to be retired and vacated. I mean, that would require, if that was something that was part of a mitigation plan, that would have to be negotiated with the Forest Service, and that would take some time, so it might, during the years of development and siting, we'd have to still keep that grazing permit active. So.
County cattle.
There you
There's an office, county beef.
Our property manager did think that was the type of property she should be managing.
Deputy, is that,
We were gonna get hats though.
Yeah.
is that Forest Service a BLM grazing permit?
I think that's Forest Service up on the
Yeah.
mountain. Yeah, correct, Steve? Yeah.
And there is BLM also.
Yeah.
So, Lord.
And I know there was talk with the observatory, is there mitigation that's been identified at all for
Dark skies.
dark sky with this site, or is it just, I don't know at what point that came up.
Yeah, I mean, it's, there's very little night lighting that would be required on the site, and we would do everything relative to, what we could to keep those lights off, and they're only turned on by motion, they're all down facing. I think one of the bigger concerns or questions is also around particulate, and is this activity throwing more particulate and creating issues relative to the dark skies there.
Okay.
So particularly in regards to the observatory. So they've noted some questions and some concerns.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's a quick flyover. We do plan to dive further into these sites, and so if there are questions and gaps here, we can study that further and address questions over the coming weeks. As we look at the new information with these newer sites or new information for this previously reviewed site. So this is a photo of Rob. I think this is from near the road going in at Pine Mountain, so you can see it's roughly around here and over this crest. So quite distant and about, if you're on Pine Mountain Road, where you see the power lines on the left side of Pine Mountain, it's roughly where that would sit. And then this is a view from the site, the one juniper out there, and a sense of some of the cobbles that are around the site too. This is probably not a great representative photo of the geology of the site, because what it appears happened is it was cleared for rye farming, actually dryland rye farming, many years ago. And so this is where they piled up the rocks that were sitting at the surface so they could plow it and harvest more efficiently. So yeah, it's not rocky like that, but there are cobbles in the mix, and that's about the size they are. So Rock Northeast owned up, provided some mapping of the sage grouse habitat or sage grouse migration modeling, just based on a circuitscape model that kind of applies electrical concepts to how sage grouse might travel based on nodes of attraction and the resistance that they face by crossing topography, fences, and other barriers. And so what kind of the brighter shades represent is an easier path to take, and then pink and red or purple is kind of a more difficult and less likely pathway for them to take. And so you may have seen in the maps they provided this big stream of black going right through the site. And so this is kind of in response to that in ways to be flexible with that Roth property and just examine a slightly different location, which is further north. I don't know if it's obvious to everyone here, but this is kind of a property boundary for Rock East. Rock West is over here, but there's this interesting kind of ridge line and feature that runs through here that this would follow along essentially the crest of that. And so most of this region is not visible from Pine Mountain Road. It is visible from Highway 20. Certainly would be, just like the power lines. But this is starting to slope east at this point, east of this line. So kind of a different region than the Milliken area, separated by this ridge line. And so it's an attempt to keep the highway free, so to speak, and stay out of the way of migration patterns. Certainly ravens would still be flying around in the broad vicinity. But a site in this location would obstruct free travel like this site. Again, it's a model. There's no, as far as we can read into the specifics of that, hasn't been ground verified, with a geotag, sage grouse or whatnot to confirm that's where they walk. But based on the model.
So the model says the green is better for sage grouse.
Yeah.
Okay. The black is, and where's the Rock East again?
It's right down here, the big X. Right?
That's Rocky.
Yes,
Yes, so that's Rock East.
So we're just moving north.
Shifting and shrinking. It's a smaller footprint, estimated at closer to 80 years of capacity.
And closer to Highway 20 too.
Closer to Highway 20, it'd be set back a
Yeah.
quarter mile. And screening could be implemented, closer to the highway to shield it from view somewhat. If you're around Milliken, wouldn't be seen. It's hidden, there's quite a ridge here, this mount, curved mount sorts. And then it continues as a ridge there, but coming west in, towards Bend from say Burns or so. It'd be there on the left, beyond and under the power line.
I'm sorry, you probably said 10 times already, but Rock East was how many acres?
Rock East is about 1,700 acres, I think.
The property or the site?
Site's 3,000, right? Wasn't it?
Roth East is about 1,700, Roth West was about 1,500.
Oh, got it. Okay.
So combined.
Yeah, combined they're over.
Yeah. So a small part of a large acquisition. Which gives opportunities for areas, to be used for mitigation purposes. And so, transmission lines do run through the northeast corner of the site. And we, if this is examined further in the next couple of weeks, we could, confirm kind of what encumbrance that would place on the site and development there. For those easements, there's at least 2 different utilities. There. 25 miles from West Centroid, a little bit shorter of an access road to get there. And access off the highway, Ford Road. Within low density sage grouse habitat, core sage grouse zones, about 0.8 miles southeast from there. So a little bit further than Rothies. Nearest residence is half a mile distant, this ranch here.
That's further from the Milliken residence, is a little by compare, but closer to that.
Yeah. Yeah. Those are
And it's a bit smaller, the actual area where you could actually produce.
Yeah.
It's, that's why it's 20 years less capacity, right?
Yeah, and again, we haven't done a full grading model for each of these, but just kind of scaling down the plan area. That's our estimate. There is some topography that can be beneficial, utilizing some of these slopes and continuing out and down, but yeah, it wouldn't likely be able to support 100 years capacity unless they go down. But again, you can only go down so far based on your excavated slopes. Nearby well logs suggest 100 feet or more of sand, gravel, clay, and cobble deposits. We don't have geotechnical data for this area, and that would be needed if the site were to move forward in subsequent phases, but that would mean cost-effective excavation and operations. Most of this area was previously a lake bed, and then there are portions of river. And you can see kind of the prehistoric, I guess, dry river meandering around where Highway 20 is there. And so some of the soils there may have been influenced from ancient river activity.
So water rights was an issue with the Rock property. How does it affect this one?
Same challenge.
You have to buy the whole 3,000 acres to get enough water.
Well, I think the water we would need to get would probably come from, not from the site. In terms of rights, we would be getting it from somebody else purchasing rights.
We haven't looked into that to see if somebody wants to sell.
We have.
We have.
Yeah, there are a few possibilities with water rights holders in the vicinity. Nothing confirmed, but initial discussions. And that would be, getting water rights transferred is no slam dunk by any means. There's a hydrogeologic review, and moving down basins usually easier than moving up a basin, but that's something that would be pursued. But there are wells on site that can provide some level of water, which could be sufficient for at least baseline flows, and perhaps fully sufficient in the winter months.
If you go whole 3,000, then the water rights, it's the same amount of water rights, and what you bought, we use Rock East or Northeast.
Yeah, each of the Roth sites probably have just a domestic water right, so 5,000 gallons a day for each of them. Now, the question would be whether you can cobble together all of their, if they have 6 individual parcels, can we cobble together all of their domestic water rates into one water rate, one well? Or would we have to run trucks from each?
If you could, does that give enough water? If you bought it.
We need about 50,000 gallons
Oh,
that would only
a
get you
day in
30.
the summertime.
So figure 10, I mean, and there's nearly 10 tax lots, but allegedly close to 19 separate deeded parcels, some of which may be bundled into one tax lot. And so if 10, let's say 10 different parcels were included in the sale, the theory is that exempt wells could be developed on each of those. We still have to confirm this because it could be seen by OWRD as the same use. It's like, oh, you've got 10 fill stations
Yes.
for a landfill.
You gotta use it on that parcel.
Yeah, I mean, they most likely can't be interconnected, like a network of wells, of exempt wells serving one point of use. But if they're distributed to different sites, maybe, but I would be walking a tight line
Yeah.
of kind of interpretation of the law, and it really serving one use, you know, even if they're at different, they're wells and say fill stations on different parcels, so. We will look into that further, but perceive some challenges with that approach. But there's at least some water available through the exempt well that's on site. And then trucking would be an option, and then transferring water rights over time. For water supply. So maybe we should probably keep moving through. We got a couple more.
Yeah.
But great question, everyone. So these are photos of the Rock Northeast site. You can kind of see that ridge line. And once you pass Milliken, maybe a quarter mile, half a mile, goes up this ridge and then starts to drop down into kind of a separate portion that from which you can't really see the Milliken Basin or Pine Mountain. So separate space there, pocket. That's looking east, and then this is looking more west. And then you can see Pine Mountain there and that kind of hillside that was down the west edge and south edge of Rock Northeast. Okay, so Horse Ridge, this one is of particular interest to the group, I guess, in that it was examined in 1996 as one of the finalist sites compared against Mink Pit. And so there's a good amount of geotechnical data for this site. It consists of 3 active aggregate mines. One's owned by Knife River, one's owned by ODOT, and one by Horse Ridge Pit LLC. And we've been in contact with all 3 of these owners, and they're all open to discussing acquisition.
Surprise.
Some more than others,
Yeah.
let's say. But taking a site visit out here with one of the property owners, and it is a site with a central band of sedimentary deposits, sand and gravel up to 30 feet deep. I think even deeper in some spots, though, up to 50 or 60.
50 or 60.
With basalt rock to the north and the south. And so 3 property acquisitions would be required, you know, from the separate owners. And the county's got a slice of that there, further up, should be used for supporting, landfill supporting facilities. Combined property area is 391 acres, 13 miles from the Waste Centroid. Frontage off of Horse Ridge Frontage Road, which is a spur off of Highway 20. I believe it was previously the old highway alignment till ODOT straightened things out. And so ODOT still owns and maintains that right of way, technically.
Where's that pit along that road? The frontage road, isn't there existing pit right now?
Yeah.
That's what, yeah,
That's
all
ODOT.
3 of those are active pits.
That's on the ODOT, what's marked as ODOT? property?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, the Horse Ridge Pit, Knife River Pit, ODOT, they're all 3.
Okay.
It's, all of that is zoned surface mine.
But there's existing mining going on.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. To varying levels, it appears that Horse Ridge Pit LLC is the most active.
Yeah.
ODOT's probably the second most active, and then Knife River. They all 3 have active mining permits. But there's some challenges with the material that has been noted. I mean, limited use, it's a lot of fine, it's like somewhere between construction sand and pea gravel generally. A lot of small rounded cobbles and gravels and sand.
How close on this map, there's a bunch of mountain biking trails out there that I know that that community would be up to, if, I mean, how much is that affected by these areas that are owned by these LLCs now? And or,
Most of the trails go around it.
okay,
There is one that seems to trespass a little bit
okay,
through the air, through
but the
here.
trails up to the south, basically lower.
Generally, yeah,
Okay.
trails to the south.
Got it.
I keep thinking if this were to happen, there could be a nice cache trail, which could be beneficial for mountain bikers, but I think the key thing is that, I mean, there is a trail here, right? And then there's there's one trailhead here. Less common, gives access to one big hard route. This one, further east, is more popular.
Where the
Generally,
bigger trail that is, yeah.
more options, and an easier ascent up the old highway grade. And then rides back down. And so kind of two options there. You can't see the site on the trailhead.
Okay.
We were out there this morning and it is a separate space. The juniper screening is, it's very effective. You know, it's just a quarter mile away or so and you can't see any of this activity. So surely things will change as if things, you know, solid waste fills up and as the height goes up, it can become more visible, but. Doesn't it seem to be massively impacting to what's going on there. The trails are much, they reach much further than this area, you know. And, but it would definitely be something if the site, the consideration of the site moves forward, engagement with CODA, I think would be advisable in bed trails.
How far is three-phase power with the Roth sites?
So three-phase power, so backing up to the Roth site briefly, three-phase power is available within, I think, about 2 miles. We looked at this at the final site level. Off of this road, so it's a shorter extension.
Okay.
That way. Even though there's a big transmission thing, but it's stepped down further east. So anyways, with this one, I'll try to move through this a little more. No residences within a quarter mile, but there are approximately 3. Okay, thanks, Siri. Approximately 3 within 1 mile. There are some homes being developed in some platted areas, smaller platted lots surrounded by BLM land off Horse Ridge Frontage Road. Up the hill here to the northwest. Some fairly nice properties. I think we saw a third one getting built today. And there's some activity here. I wouldn't say it's necessarily development or residential development. Things are being placed out there.
That are mobile.
And yeah, mobile in nature.
Yes.
Would trucks like drive on the same road as those properties then, like
That-
on their address road?
That they,
The
yeah,
nice
use to access.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, so haul route impacts would be a concern along there for those 2 to 3 properties and the ones that are vacant, you know, there may be intentions to develop those at some point, so that's 3 for now. 2 and 3. 2 existing wells on site, but no water rights. Central band, I'll talk about that, 80 to 100 a year. Disposal capacities estimated depending on the footprint and depth here. You know, one thing that could impact the footprint is there's a county code requirement that landfill disposal areas are set back quarter mile from public roads and from residences. Which is interesting because not landfill right over here is about 100 feet from 27th Street.
Right.
It's a very busy road. This. Looking at the chronology, it looks like that ordinance was placed in, was enacted after that landfill was established in 72. So, it's kind of an interesting obstacle there. And so, either a code variance would be sought to place it, you know, with some sort of compromise, maybe it's 300 feet of screening, accounting for the amount of traffic there. And you know, how that variance. And making a case of the public benefit, you know, and having flexibility with that code. Or road realignment is another one, and that would, both of those could have their challenges. Being that it's an ODOT right of way, I can take quite a bit of coordination or vacation of that, or them dedicating it to the county. So that's definitely something that would need to be studied further and coordinated upon further. To make available as much property as possible. To increase the capacity, but the fact that it's already a disturbed site with, you know, established mining operations, SM zoning. And mining permits is very beneficial, and that property owners are generally, they're interested in talking, at least. I think that's all we can say at this point.
Yeah, it's interesting because, I mean, obviously Knife River does a ton of work in Central Oregon, right? And ODOT, obviously other state highways, and then I have no idea who Horse Ridge Pit sells their aggregate. Oh, Robertson, okay. So, I mean, they're all pretty active, so I'm surprised, they would have to go find additional areas that are zoned for mining, right?
This one for Knife River, they really only use it mostly as a disposal site for concrete. It's not a rock that's ODOT spec that they can use, and they have other locations. For Horse Ridge, they're primarily selling it to Bend Airport. It's a good drainage rock. Again, it meets an FAA spec, but I need an ODOT spec, so.
Got it, okay, good to know.
But if it was a landfill, when they, county would excavate the rock for them essentially, right?
Essentially, yeah. Yeah, particularly with ODOT.
Yeah.
And then ODOT might use it for drain rock or as concrete rock. Rounded rock.
What are the Golden Eagle restrictions? It's only 1.5 miles to the southwest.
Yeah, we would need to consult with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service on what the impacts would be. It appears to be beyond the ridge, which is perhaps 0.5 mile or 1 mile to the southwest for Horse Ridge. There's kind of 3 ridges really that are part of that formation. And so the Golden Eagle nest is beyond that, and so not sure exactly what the impacts would be. With Moon Pit, it was nearby a Golden Eagle nest mapped in the Dry River Canyon, and consideration of a take permit was considered. And so that may be what needs to happen here.
Yeah, I think that the one thing, the 2 things we should add is this site was ruled out the last time. Because for 2 reasons. One, it did fall into low density sage-grouse, that's now moved out, it's no longer. And there was a Golden Eagle overlay, they didn't identify the nest, so the whole site was under an overlay. That was the fatal flaw, we didn't know if there was nesting on or adjacent to the site. So to the question of if it being 1.5 miles away, it's most likely mitigatable. Yeah. It's just working with ODFW as to what would that mitigation look like, what and require.
And that's what we had identified in this, process screening, was that if it was greater than 0.5 mile away, it could be mitigated.
Yeah, but we just didn't know.
Yeah.
And the water rights and that 7-mile extension of power line, none of those can be dealt with.
It can be dealt with, it's money.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the same thing, that the 7 miles, this is really the frontage road where it runs into 20 is the location where is the offshoot to head up to Moon Pit. So we had the same issue there, that we'd have to run electricity, and there was a little bit farther.
So why did this not get selected in 1996?
There was some, I think part of it was the size, part of it was water runoff. There was some concern around how would they manage water coming down that ridge. You know, there is a way to engineer that, basically cut it off and route it around the site. But it wasn't, I think that was the primary reason in 96 that it was ruled out.
So, and also that you had not landfill here. You know, it was already here, it was established, and they discovered at that point that it was, the rock wasn't quite as difficult to work with as they originally thought. So that's why I move forward.
Yeah, move on.
Yeah.
Can I add something real quick? The only reason that eagle's nest is there is because the county is disposing of roadkill deer somewhere in that vicinity. Eagles being opportunists, gut eaters, carrion eaters, they will live where they can get a free meal real quick. You move that site and the nest is gonna go away.
So move it out by Ross.
Yeah, there
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to point out, the previous study in 96 found a projectile point, lithic scattering can dumps on site, during the cultural reconnaissance survey in 96, similar to what was found at Moon Pit. So there's some evidence of cultural resources, but again, we believe that would be mitigatable, and there wasn't evidence of a site, just isolates. So here are some site photos we got from a drone flight. There's plenty more, but this gives a sense of the level of impact there. And yeah, 3 sites. This is the Robinson site. This is the ODOT site here along the frontage road, and then Knife River, this area generally.
Pretty close to the roadway. That roadway they run through there, yeah.
So Golden Basin West, this is on 2 parcels west of the Golden Basin site, which we did review at focus screening. At the time, that was eliminated due to unwillingness to sell. Golden Basin Ranch was recently listed for $4.5 million, with nearly 2,000 deeded acres and perhaps 80,000 or so in allotments of acreage. These 2 deeded parcels are included in that. Delisted currently, county's reached out and is awaiting a response from the owner. No residences within 3 miles, so it's a very remote site, well hidden. It is surrounded by BLM land, but accessible via a 60-foot wide right of way along Ford Road, just a meandering road, pretty rough and rocky. But there is a 60-foot wide right of way map through there, which may provide a pathway for a road to be extended. But we need to research that further as to whether there's some sort of BLM nexus with that and a right of way grant from BLM that would be needed for commercial haul along that route.
I would think that some of that BLM coordination you talked about with the other side is could be more difficult here given that sage grouse. Where they're equipped.
Potentially. Yeah, 'cause this is it's on the far eastern edge of low density sage-grouse habitat, but it is not within it. Would require road reconstruction along Ford Road, approximately 7 miles from the end of Gosney and Arnold Market Road. And there'd be haul route impacts along those roads from not landfill to get to that point. Or Stuckey Road, which comes off Horse Ridge Frontage Road, roughly 5 miles. Another rough and rocky road. So BLM coordination and NEPA compliance may be required to those. The records on those routes are pretty patchy, so we'll continue to research that and coordinate with BLM folks. And yeah, Golden Eagle and Big Air, that nest points are within a 1.5 mile radius. This site, kind of off the page slightly here, are some of the caves, Big Ear Bat caves, and then Golden Eagle to the north, roughly.
No water and power in there.
Yeah, no water or power infrastructure, so it'd likely be trucked in. 13 miles from Way Centroid. There isn't much for geotechnical data here, but the NRCS soil data classifies it as sandy loam, and the landforms around it suggest alluvial or windblown deposits between the ridges, but the depth there is unknown. So
I guess I would suggest before we spend a lot of time on this site, to talk about besides the owner, the one itself is talk to BLM right up front.
Yeah.
And I know the FW and Fish and Wildlife Service, you know, if you're concerned about that 3-year EIS, maybe look at that here.
Yeah, could be. You can see there in orange, this site among the other heated parcels outlined in red. That are a part of that listing. And some of the other contact points, Horse Ridge site here, Gold Base left site there. Off the east way over there. It does include a well, and so I guess. Take back what I said, no, I mean, water infrastructure, there is surprisingly a pipeline. Routed from this well. Which is an exempt well. And was pumping water, stock water. Miles and miles to all those holdings, so there is some water infrastructure. I question how usable that is for landfill purposes. But there's that.
It is our understanding, I think on that lower parcel where the well is. Not where the house is, but where the well is, that may be a lek too, correct?
I think it's where the house is.
Where the house
These
is.
two,
Yeah, so there is a lek on this property. Which might help with, you know, take all of this out of pasture or out of production.
Yeah. That's a vicinity map, kind of showing where that is, Dry River Canyon, Horse Ridge.
So that power line would have to come in along that road and all that distance.
Yeah.
The caves, see there, this is part of Trump Ford Road.
Might have to be updated.
Yeah.
Just a little bit.
Get some off-road transfer trucks. That is the site generally kind of between these two pockets, very well hidden. From view. I mean, from here it looks pretty open, but from where highways are and most viewpoints, it's pretty well hidden pocket. Okay, Dodds Roadside.
There's a question. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. With the Horse Ridge site, what was you said there was an issue with the distance to the road, that there may be criteria that did you say there may need to be a variance, or what was that?
Yeah.
Oh, there we go. Road realignment or code variance may be required to address a quarter-mile road setback. Have we gotten the opinion from the community development department about opposition on that?
No, I put a call into them today, but I haven't heard back. This came up as we were starting to review the site in the last few days.
Okay.
But basically, the same county commissioners would approve the variance as would approve the landfill.
Okay. Oh, sorry to bounce back. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries.
Okay, so one more. The Dodds Road site, 400-acre property owned by COID, acquisition potentials TBD. I think outreach has begun, but we haven't heard back. 14 miles from the Way Centroid, access to the site from Highway 20 and Dodds Road. Estimating it could support roughly an 80-year disposal capacity. Shallow bedrock is anticipated. And you can see the rock formations sticking out of the ground. And nearby well logs also from that. Existing wells and residences are nearby. It's approximately 3 within a half mile, which are around here. 25 within 1 mile, and then if you reach out further, it's 60. So the proximity to farms, ranches, and Badlands Wilderness area to the east are definite strikes against this one. No wells or water rights on site. But there is 3-phase power near southwest corner of the site right here at Dodds and Overland. Terrain is undulating and generally sloping down to the north. And so there may be a potential for this area to be screened as this kind of rolls over from where the road is, and with berming and some of the natural juniper and rocky ridges there. Actually, it could be kept from being as visible as it appears from this plan view. But there are some challenges with that site, particularly the proximity there. But it's outside of habitat, certainly out of safe grass habitat, and it's just kind of between low density habitat and the Bend Airport, 5-mile radius. So there's a view from the road.
So. Back to you, Tim.
Um, So there are the potential you could say, move forward on the Rock East site. And if we were to go that path, then we would, before going to the board, want to negotiate a letter of intent. We would move, currently have a contract with parametrics, so we can move right into the phase 3. So what we're doing right now is stepping back into phase 2 work that we were doing before, which was site screening and selection. We do have parametrics under a phase 3 contract to do the permitting, design, layout, work, and full assessment. To be able to submit for the permits. So we could move straight into that with the Roth East site. Or move and screen, evaluate, go a little deeper into these other sites to determine if there's one or more sites that we could do more technical review. If we were to do that, that would probably take us into the second quarter of 2026, so spring 2026, for us to be able to be where we're at in the Rock East site. Or if you have other ideas, but that's kind of where we're at this point. I think we've gotten this enough. So what we're looking at is if you want us to dig a little deeper into some of these other sites that we can meet in June and bring back preliminary findings, what we would go to the level of what we call focus screening. In July, we could kind of confirm what those site evaluations are and see if there are some finalist sites that you may recommend that we do a full technical review on. Or again, at any time, say, move forward with Rock East. But if in July or August, you say, no, go deeper on one or more of these sites, this timeline would then continue. You may not be meeting monthly at that point. We may go into hiatus while we do some technical work and then come back 3 months later and start to present some of those findings. So we're saying kind of plan on the next, probably up to 3 more meetings before we know which path we're going to go. If it's the pleasure of this committee that we continue to evaluate some of these alternative sites, or even additional site if something comes up. So is there a general feeling of this group?
I have a thought, but go ahead.
Go ahead, Rob.
To me, I like the idea. What was it, Leroy? And also, Phil Chang suggested of not going with one site, the Roth East right now, but going with maybe 3. Getting to that point or 2, that's all we can do. Some of these other sites still, to me, maybe more attractive than Roth East. Roth East had a lot of negatives. Especially like that Horse Ridge, but based on what little I've seen so far, I think it's worthy of further evaluation. And maybe the Dodge site too. I know there'd be a lot of more local opposition there, but it's closer to the landfill, less all time, less, greenhouse gas emissions, things like that. I wouldn't go straight to Roth East, at least not yet.
I agree with that.
But it might not be bad to include that east, just to refresh, kind of where we are with it.
The Roth East, yeah. No, we'll continue to meet with them and get farther along on what would a purchase would then look like.
And can you remind me, I think both Dodge and Horse Ridge in said estimated scale, that was something less than 100 years.
Yeah.
Were those, but were those still on the list before, but it was just like, it's still kind of site dependent, and there might be more information that can give you more detail of how much it'll be? Or was it other things that pulled them off the list?
So for Horse Ridge, it was other things that pulled it off.
Okay,
And again, the way the topography on that site works and the way the soils are, we might be able to get it over 100 years. We just have to get into that deeper technical to know what the time frame would be. It's got a ridge along it, and you can actually use that to build against.
okay.
So you aren't making a pyramid, you're making a.
Yeah.
So you gain airspace with that.
Okay,
The Dodge site, I think that came off because of size.
okay.
And I'm not sure, it may have been a seller issue too. We had to go back and look at that. I just don't recall.
I'm generally supportive of Robbins. I think expanding, just because of the distance and undisturbed nature of that compared to the alternatives, which have the potential for mitigating those pieces if some of the other questions can be answered. Horse Ridge Dots, I think are worth considering.
Yeah, I think.
Question, could I have a question? Or can we come across this question?
Yeah, hold on one second. Somebody on the committee had a question.
I was gonna say, I don't think we should consider the Golden Basin sites, given the fact that, I mean, it's 7 miles of road improvements, there's no water or power. And the fact that we'd have to coordinate with the BLM on access, in my past experience, if we're having to coordinate with them on access, we're gonna be coordinating with them past the sunset date of the Knott landfill. They're very hard to pin down and get something accomplished with.
Yeah, I think the question that we were gonna ask was, do they feel that they have a claim that we have to, it's a 60-foot easement, and I believe it's a county easement. Is that sufficient, or would they, under their rules, would they say, no, we have to, even though we have that easement and the wide one that would be our needs, would we still have to do an EIS? So we're figuring we do, but we'd have to check with them. You had a question over there, Leroy?
I do. I'm watching this whole process play out here. And it looks to me like construction is slated 5 or 6 years from now. And I see grave concerns here about golden eagles, possibly even bald eagle nests. And so my question is, what happens if you guys select a place? And between the time you select it and the time you start your construction, the eagle sets up residence there, what happens?
It's a good question. I don't know. You thought on that?
Well, let me follow up with that. Yeah. Might be a good reason to have more than one site.
Yeah.
Is because I don't know the answer to this either, and I don't know if your environmentalist or your lawyer knows this, but I can just tell you from my own personal experience, I lived in Alaska my whole life, and there was a huge dock expansion that was taken on down in Dutch Harbor. And the main contractor there, at great expense to himself, moved this giant crane from Seattle up there to do this huge construction project. And some fool left the crane 180 feet in the air, and some eagle came along there and put its nest up there. And it stopped the entire project and bankrupted the guy. And all because this eagle was up there just happily living on top of this crane. And it just drove home the point to me that, you could find the finest site you might find here, but you might want to make sure you have an alternative unless you have some way of dealing with this wayward eagle that comes in. It's just a thought, Appreciate it.
Well, and I appreciate that opinion too. That almost sounds like another what if scenario, and that what if that happened at the Knott landfill right now? What if an eagle set up posts there? Like, what would the measures be to follow through on that? It's hard to come up with alternative scenarios to that. until it actually happens. And knowing what those mitigation measures are ahead of time are good. I don't know if we would necessarily try to plan a site based on those scenarios, though.
I think I forget if the Golden Eagle and Bald Eagle Act don't have the same take requirements of mitigation as an Endangered Species Act. You know, listed species would have, but consult with Fish and Wildlife. So
Yeah, and we'll do that. We'll check out
But I imagine we
specifically
get a
that.
take permit of some kind.
Yeah.
Well, we're running to the end of the time. Any other comments?
I'll just say I agree with screening and evaluating alternative sites. I think that makes the most sense in this situation right now.
I agree too with the reasons that have been said already.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with that too.
So I think we have consensus.
Yeah. Force rank
Yeah, so, yeah, we will continue and start to dive a bit deeper, certainly on Dodd, on Horse Ridge. We'll come back, we'll do a little more work on Golden Basin. One thing, it may be ruled out anyway, we have not heard back from the seller. Over 3 weeks of reaching out and no comment back, so. That may already be settled, but we're continuing to reach out. You do know the price of the asking. So.
Right.
All right, so we will reach out and doodle the date on June 17th, just to see if that's gonna work for both, or if there's a better date, but it'll be currently plan on it, that's our tentative date, but we'll reach out and make sure that we have a date that.
Is that the Tuesday morning time?
Yeah,
That's the
kind of back
Tuesday
to the-
morning,
Yeah.
but we can do a broader, because it is a new group. So we may put a doodle out, just make sure what is the optimal day and time for folks on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, I know 5 months ago, I bought airline tickets to Dolomites to go hiking, so I won't be here in person as to whether I can come in on some Wi-Fi.
Rub it in.
Midnight over there.
All right, well, thank you all.
Thank you. It's actually good timing in Europe, 6 to. Yeah.
Thanks all online, appreciate it.
Great.
Thanks, folks.
Good to see you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah.